Hello, this is Dr. Bin Song at Washington College. In this Unit 2 of the course Foundations of Morality, we will introduce the basics of logic that you will need to command before learning the skill of philosophical counseling. As explained in the first unit, one advantage that the philosophers have in their practice of counseling is their ability to discern the intricate process of behavioral and emotional reasoning for their clients. Actually, this advantage of philosophical training is not only represented in the work of therapy and counseling. Once you command the sophisticated level of logic, argumentation, and reasoning that is required from a philosophy major, you can apply this skill to virtually all areas of human knowledge. This is one reason why philosophy majors perform phenomenally in applying to graduate schools, communicating with peer workers, or earning more salaries in their middle careers after they left the college, to name a few instances. However, considering that not all of you has taken the course of Introduction to Logic, and that even if you took it, you have not yet put your knowledge of logic in the context of philosophical counseling, I will introduce the basics of logic needed by our course in this unit. So, the first question is, what is logic? Logic is the study of reasoning, which provides standards for distinguishing good reasoning from bad reasoning. Philosophical counseling in the form of logic-based therapy, LBT, applies these standards in distinguishing good, namely rational behavioral and emotional reasoning, from bad, namely irrational behavioral and emotional reasoning. Then the second question is, what is reasoning? All reasoning consists of two components. First, at least one premise, and second, one conclusion. The premise of your reasoning provides the reasons or evidence that you are using to support your conclusion. Accordingly, the conclusion of your reasoning is a statement that you believe on the basis of your premise. For example, the following is a reasoning. Quote, I should stay quiet when others are studying in the library because that's what I would expect of others. Quote, here, I am concluding that I should be quiet based on the premise that I would expect the same from others. There are two general types of reasoning, induction and deduction. Inductive reasoning is a reasoning in which you base your conclusion on a premise that supports your conclusion with a certain degree of probability. That is, the premise gives you a strong reason for concluding something, but it does not guarantee that this conclusion is true. For example, you might conclude that the course in this fall semester will end up in a few weeks after the Thanksgiving holiday, so that you have booked a travel for that time, because in your mind the school most often ended that way before. However, while this conclusion may be quite probable given your past experience, it is not automatic and certain. Indeed, something could happen abruptly so as to change the normal schedule. The current pandemic is one best example for this. So, all inductive reasoning is like this. Even if all your premises are true, your conclusion is at most probable, not certain. Deductive reasoning is different. If the premise of deductive reasoning is true, your conclusion will automatically be true too. In other words, there is an automatic transmission of truth value from the premises to the conclusion in deductive reasoning. In fact, we say that deductive reasoning is valid, namely acceptable, only if the conclusion is automatically true when the premises are true. For example, the following is valid deductive reasoning. Quote, if someone is a human, then they will someday die. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates will someday die. Quote, notice that in the case of the aforementioned reasoning, if the premises are true, the conclusion is automatically true. It's guaranteed to be true. However, it is usually the case that the premises in valid deductive reasoning are not themselves certain. For example, the premise that if someone is a human, then they will someday die is not certain, because it is itself a conclusion drawn from inductive reasoning. To say this, you need only consider how we can claim to know that all humans die. We believe this premise because we have concluded from the further premise that all humans have always died in the past. But it is still possible that in the future, we might figure out how to make ourselves immortal. At least the idea of immortal human beings is not self-contradictory, and hence is possible in reality. So, we can't conclude with certainty that if someone is a human, they will someday die. Of course, it's very likely, and for practical purposes, we might not question it, but strictly speaking, it is only probable and not automatically true. So, even though the conclusions of deductive reasoning are automatically true, given that their premises are true, the conclusions of such a reasoning may still not be true. This can be the case when at least one of the premises is false. For example, consider this reasoning, quote, "If you are a human, then you will live forever. You are a human, therefore you will live forever." Quote. Here, one of the premises is probably false, so the conclusion that you will live forever is not automatically true. It would have to be true only if both of the premises were true. From these discussions, we also find that deductive reasoning could be sound or valid. If all of the premises of a valid deductive argument are true, then its conclusion will also be true. Such a deductive argument that has all true premises is called sound deductive reasoning. So, in valid deductive reasoning, the conclusion is automatically true if all of its premises are true. And in sound deductive reasoning, all the premises are actually true. Since we have got to know the basics of logic, let's talk about the topic most needed by our course, that is reasoning in emotions. LBT uses the concept of sound deductive reasoning in building its theory of emotions. The first thing to notice is that when you have emotions, you typically engage in reasoning. This is important because there is a popular myth that engaging in reasoning and having emotions are like oil and water. They don't get mixed. This claim, however, confuses irrational emotions with all emotions. There is a deep linguistic dimension for all human emotions, and irrational emotions also involve reasoning, but the reasoning is just not sound reasoning. For example, consider the following reasoning. First premise: if I don't get to sleep tonight, I will mess up at work tomorrow, lose my job, and be the biggest loser on earth. Second premise: I am not going to get any sleep the rest of the night. I just can't sleep. Conclusion: so I am going to mess up at work tomorrow, lose my job, and be the biggest loser on earth. If you are doing this reasoning, you will predictably work yourself up and experience intense anxiety. Notice that this reasoning, which you may be doing to make yourself anxious, is deductive in character. That is, its conclusion is automatic, given its premises. However, notice that the second premise, that you are not going to get any sleep and cannot fall asleep, is itself an inductive conclusion you may be drawing from the fact that you have not yet fallen asleep. This conclusion may well be probable insofar as you have been tossing and turning for several hours, and usually stay up the entire night when this happens. On the other hand, because it is probable and not automatic, it is still possible to change something to make it less likely. For example, you could stop ruminating about messing up at work tomorrow, start to do some sitting or lying meditation, force yourself to clear your mind and go to sleep. Now, look at the first premise, that if you don't go to sleep, you will mess up, lose your job, and be the biggest loser on earth. This premise not only draws a questionable inductive conclusion about what will happen if you don't get to sleep, it also rates you as being the biggest loser on earth if it happens. So this premise is irrational for two reasons. First, it is not really probable that you will mess up and lose your job if you don't get to sleep. To be probable, you would need sufficient evidence, namely further true premises, to support this prediction. Second, messing up and losing your job does not equate to being the biggest loser on earth. Indeed, this concept has no true reference, since there is no such a thing as the biggest loser on earth. Instead, there are fallible human beings, which include all of us. Further, messing up and losing your job may make you unemployed, at least temporarily, but it won't make you, globally speaking, a loser, even if it would make you a loser of your present job, for you would still be the same human being, with the same capacities for constructive thought and action that you were before losing your job. In short, this premise would be irrational, because the premises of the above reasoning are not all true or justified. It is not a sound deductive reasoning, which makes the emotion, namely your anxiety over not being able to fall asleep based on it, irrational. Here, the core idea is that by identifying the flawed reasoning behind the anxiety, it can be debunked. For such purposes, philosophical counselors use classic methods of refutation, such as the method of reduction to the absurd, namely showing that accepting a premise or conclusion leads to an absurd consequence, deducing a contradiction, namely showing that a contradiction can be deduced from a set of premises, showing that the person doing the reasoning has double standards, showing that there is insufficient evidence to support a conclusion. All these flawed reasonings commit a fallacy, and throughout the course, we will examine the most frequent fallacies humans are likely to commit when they are experiencing self-defeating emotions. Using the same instance, let's say, if everyone that has once lost their job is a loser on earth, many extremely successful people would be counted as a loser, which is absurd. Think about Bill Gates, who didn't even finish his college. Therefore, by the method of reduction to the absurd, we can discern the conclusion based upon the faulty premise will not be sound. Once we realize this, we will have a good foundation to start to work on our emotions. And we will do many exercises like this to find this fallacious reasoning down the road. In a word, the role which logic plays in the practice of LBT would be like the tool used by a gardener to find the origin of weeds so as to clear out rooms for the flourishing of her plants. Similarly, through finding the faulty premises which underlie the reasoning process of our negative emotions, such as intense anxiety, guilt, anger, and depression, we can correct them and replace them with more rational and realistic ideas. If we can make all our emotional and behavioral reasonings, firstly, be uncovered and get a chance to be reflected upon, and secondly, be valid and sound, that will be the crucial step we take to live a healthy and good human life.